All right, let's stay with legal matters. Justice and Constitutional Development Minister Mmamoloko Kubayi has expressed sadness over the killing of community activist Pamela Mabini. According to police, she was gunned down by unknown assailants in the driveway of her home in Gqeberha. Kalay Pillay, Deputy Director General, Legislative Development of the Department of Justice, joins us now for this conversation. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. I mean, this is a huge loss, especially when you think about the gender-based violence activism space. You think about the Timothy Omotoso case and how she was there to support witnesses daily. Certainly, this loss will be felt.
Yes, definitely. And the fact that she was supporting victims of crime in courts and ensuring that the witnesses attended courts as well is a real loss for the entire process. And the manner in which she died obviously is very painful for the family and I'm sure the community as well.
And when you look at this matter, it's again put the killing of activists and whistleblowers in the spotlight. You think about the fact that according to some reports, they say her life was also under threat in about 2018 when there was a previous attempt to take her life. One would then ask, it certainly is concerning that we still are seeing a number of whistleblowers and activists being targeted in this manner.
Yes, and it begs the question, if there was one attempt on her life, what was the processes that were put in place to investigate the threats against her, and why was there not adequate protection for her to have died in the manner that she did? And it talks to the issue of police protection. It talks to the question of what does the law provide in terms of witness protection, and whether she was indeed involved in the case to the extent that would have qualified her to receive that witness protection, in fact, if her life was in danger and at risk.
And that was going to be my next question, to see if whether or not you've been able to engage with the police at all or anyone in that particular province or in that space to see if there was a threat assessment that was done and where the failures would have been then.
No, we have not done so as yet, but we are making attempts to do so. We are going to contact the DPP of the province as well to ascertain what's the circumstances around this case and her role in the investigations that were undergoing in the province.
And when you look at the minister's statement, for example, it says that efforts are currently ongoing to strengthen legal protection, including reviewing legislation. And this has been an ongoing issue for quite some time. We've been speaking about the strengthening of legislation, amending legislation in order to be protecting whistleblowers. But while all of these processes are unfolding, right now, there are possibly whistleblowers who are watching these developments, fearing for their lives. And this, no doubt, will have, an adverse impact on some of the matters going forward.
Yes, so the law does protect witnesses through the Witness Protection Act. But I think we need to draw a distinction between what the legislation provides for people who blow the whistle. And the current protections can be found in the Protected Disclosures Act, which deals with the employee-employer relationship, and it has a whole wide range of mechanisms in place to protect such a relationship. One of the challenges that we are faced with the Protected Disclosures Act, in fact, is that it's not wide enough to cover whistleblowers in the instances such as that of Ms. Mabini, the late Ms. Mabini, and others who face these challenges. Should the definition of whistleblower be broad enough to extend to persons in her situation, but also where a person doesn't necessarily have to be giving evidence in court as is currently provided for in the Witness Protection Act, or likely to give evidence in a criminal matter, that only then would you be allowed protection under the Witness Protection Act. So there are gaps in the law, and there are certain protections that we've uncovered through our research, and now we have to expand the law to make provision for this. And of course, the practical implications in drawing new legislation is that the legislation will only be as strong as the implementation of it, and we are currently conducting a costing exercise to see the implementation, whether the implementation of the legislation will work, to secure the funding and to arrange other practical issues so that the criminal justice system works better together in protecting witnesses.
How long is that going to take?
We've done the research. The research is completed. We've assessed the comments that have come through. And as you know, there's a lot of activism in this area as well. We are taking note of that. By June, we should be ready to take the bill, the costing through the relevant structures for approval.
All right, and of course, you know, you speak about June, and certainly someone is watching to say that at least the needle then is moving, especially when you think about the fact that you would have seen a number of activists in different areas who are also, you know, were being killed. We think about, for example, in the Eastern Cape, you think about Amadiba Crisis Committee, you think in KwaZulu-Natal, Abahlali baseMjondolo also in some of the instances. So when you're broadening the meaning of a whistleblower, will it then include, for example, people who are also activists in different spaces so that they can also be possibly covered?
Well, you see, I must point out that this is where the danger in expanding the legislation comes in. If you expand the legislation beyond let's use the word to say the traditional use of the word whistleblower, if you expand it broader, you're going to come up with questions about the resources to protect everybody. And are there other laws that also protect people on a broad scale? So we have, for instance, the Protection from Harassment Act. We can also report cases in terms of all whistleblowers can also, well, not necessarily whistleblowers, but people working in communities can report to the police in terms of intimidation. So there are other means to protect people, although we are not saying that we're closing the door to protect people who need that protection and could fall within the classification of a whistleblower. But I must add that broadening the scope too wide will then create a situation where those who are actually going to court to give the evidence will not receive the necessary protection. So it's a very fine balancing act to see how do we take our resources and utilize it to give protection to the people who require it most. And we do want to see convictions in courts. We want to see sentences against perpetrators, etc. So we have to find a way of creating that balance. But that doesn't rule out the process of how do we strengthen our systems generally to ensure that people who have a complaint that they are being threatened and intimidated, who can they go to? For instance, the Protected Disclosures Act was amended in 2021, and we had 6 organizations to which people could make those reports. We have since expanded it by adding another 33 more to make it more accessible, to make reports on where you are intimidated and threatened with your life, just because you have come forward to report a crime or a suspected crime or something that you think could be a crime. So the definition of what you can report is quite broad, but at the same time, there must be there's a lot of other mechanisms that we've got to utilize so that we popularize that, so that we protect people. But of course, it would require the JCPS cluster also coming into play, for instance, performing risk assessments, carrying out the other work of protection, taking it seriously in terms of Protection of Harassment Act. For instance, if there's a protection order that the person obtained, that you act on it and that you take those matters to the rightful conclusions if a complaint has come through.
Yeah, I suppose it's quite a complex one, especially when you think about the broadening of the definition there, as well as the the resources and all of that. But if you may allow me to just ask you this question, then, as you're speaking about the issues of disclosure, please, the decision to delay the release of the National Register for Sex Offenders, the minister saying that there's still quite a lot of conversations that need to be had there around the disclosures, and now she's going to be speaking to a number of stakeholders. You do have some activists who are disappointed by this very decision, and they say that it appears as if perpetrators are more protected than the victims. How does the department contend with that?
Yes, we are currently also undertaking a huge project on the review of the Criminal Procedure Act, because I think, as we know, the Criminal Procedure Act is the foundation of our criminal justice system. It dictates the procedure when anybody appears in court. And what we have found through our consultations and the national conference that was held and the comments and inputs that are coming through is that the criminal justice system is weighted in favor of the perpetrator of a crime. There's very little attention paid to victims of crime. So that thematic area about making the victims the center of the criminal justice system is actually receiving our attention across all fields of the law, whether it's the Sexual Offences Act, whether it is the Protected Disclosures Act, whether it is the Witness Protection Act. That is where we need to try and reinstill the necessity that victims are at the center of the criminal justice system, and they are the ones that we must protect. However, that doesn't mean that the guarantees that are in the Constitution for accused persons will fall away. However, it's the way we have structured our systems that we have placed more focus, and they are more at the forefront than the victims of crime. And I think the current challenges that we are facing, as you say, with the register and with whistleblowing, is the fact that we want to place witnesses at the center of the criminal justice system.
All right, certainly this is an ongoing conversation, but I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much for chatting to us. That was Kalay Pillay, the Deputy Director General, Legislative Development of the Department of Justice, as we're talking about a very important issue that not only speaks about, just the issues around whistleblowing, but also there's that National Register for Sex Offenders. And a very, very key part of the conversation is that now the department wants to have victims at the center of the criminal justice system. So we'll continue then to monitor the developments around that for you.